last 8 years, I have been at the University of Michigan. I run an initiative called the Base of the Pyramid Initiative, which builds off of, and we saw a slide from CK, some of CK's early work. He was also at the University of Michigan. And I'm also on the faculty at the Ross School, and I teach around this topic. So as we think about the next generation of leaders, and I'll put a plug in for our students, I think they're the best. So if you're looking for good people that really are thinking a lot about this space, think about University of Michigan and Ross. And I'm not paid for that plug, but we think they're great. What we do is, and we work very closely over the years with Toshi and Eriko and IFC and others, is to really think about how do we want to move this domain forward in a meaningful way. So you can imagine when I said 8 years ago, the change has been phenomenal. The initiatives we've heard about, the efforts, we started kind of using, the first ideas around Base of the Pyramid came out in 1999 and really reached prominence with CK's book in 2005, 2006 in terms of kind of hitting the mainstream. But when we convened the leaders in the Base of the Pyramid field from across the globe, it probably wouldn't have even filled this room. It was such a new and exciting idea, but there just weren't a lot of people. And back then, it was a lot about motivation. How do we get people interested? You said CK came to the board and got them excited. And that was sort of what we were trying to do, is say there is something interesting here. You just have to think about the world a little bit differently and see the opportunity. And then you've got a whole bunch of other challenges. And back then, it was about finding a fortune at the base of the pyramid, right? And it was really thinking that there is something there and we need to execute. But it sort of gave this early sense that there was something waiting to be found. And that, I think, created some initial misconceptions about how to go about operating and some disappointment. And what it's really evolved to, and I think it's a much more important way to think about it, and we did some recent work and have really talked more about this, and I'm happy to share that, but it's not about finding a fortune at the base of the pyramid. It's about creating a fortune with the base of the pyramid. And it sounds like just changing a few words, but it's a huge, huge fundamental shift. Finding is about executing against something. Creating is about innovating towards something. At the base of the pyramid sounds like it's a place, or maybe it's somebody waiting for you to show up. With the base of the pyramid means you're actively engaging with the poor in your model development. And the changes, I think the early momentum and some of the initial challenges were kind of misunderstanding what you need to do to execute in this space. What we're seeing now is all the things whereas Francisco was just talking about, innovation and trial and error and learning, and that's different from saying we have a model and it's really just about execution. And I think that's where we need to go. And there's still a lot of challenges, and we're seeing kind of the next evolution of the domain coming up. It's a plug for an event, so I think you all got it. We have a summit that we host. We do this on a regular basis, where we're trying to convene the thought leaders and say, where does the domain need to go next? And one of the big things that we see now that we'll be really thinking about at this summit is, there are a lot of individual ventures. I know you've been talking about this today and earlier, but there isn't really a community. And there are some things that we need to do as a community. The old proverb is, I can go faster as an individual, but I can go a lot further as a community. And what do we need to do? It's about how do we best channel and create community assets? What do we want to do about funding models? How do we share experiences in a way that makes sense? How do we really, and the topic of this panel, how do we really understand the base of the pyramid? What have we learned? What as a community do we think about as best practices? So we'll certainly be engaged. Some of you may want to come. If not, you can't come. Be aware that we'll be putting out a report, sort of a roadmap that we think will really help us think about the next stages in the evolution of the domain. We were talking about BOP 1.0. I think creating the fortune with the base of the pyramid was BOP 2.0. What's the next big step here because we want to keep moving forward. There's still a lot to learn here. So that's sort of
okay, thank you.
An introduction at least.
Thank you. And the topic we really wanted to focus on today, stemming from the conversations we've already had so far, was really around this idea of understanding the BOP as a market and how that can inform the design or even the expansion of inclusive business models. And we've actually already heard a couple people bring up this topic. My first question is really, we did a poll this morning, so I wrote down the results, and we asked what approaches are companies using to gather market insights. So if you remember, it came out at 13% using basic market research already available, and then a sort of a split between individuals or companies who are doing surveys versus focus groups versus really just visiting. And actually a very small percentage, sort of what they had defined as trial and error. So I just wanted to ask both Dorje and Ted, given your experiences in the field and the challenges with actually gathering and sort of interpreting BOP insights, were these figures surprising in terms of how they broke out, and sort of what do you see as both the challenges and the challenges in actually getting that type of information?
So no, not surprising at all. For me, the difficult thing about that poll was which of the answers do I give? Because I could have used kind of at least 3 of those different things. But we're doing primary market research in some cases, very judicious spending because we don't want to blow the budget. We've got to be lean about this. But we also are putting our people out into the field and getting direct insights. And it's interesting. When we put senior people out into the field and they spend an extended period of time talking to nurses, to primary care physicians out in the villages, talking to specialist doctors in field hospitals and so on, and they say, it's so rich, the feedback that we get, and they're used to getting in their kind of executive teams back in the office, these huge slide decks from IMS and these other agencies, 100-page decks with 200 pie charts and all this kind of stuff, and they get that regularly. But what they get through that face-to-face direct interaction is so much richer. So that piece has proven to be really important for us. But then based on getting the insights both directly and through agencies, then we do the trial and error. So, and again, as I said before, the costs of doing that trial, making small mistakes, when you're at a small-scale pilot is not a problem. But what we don't want to do is go large and then start making the errors. So kind of it's all part of that process. One of the other things that we've done kind of in terms of getting the insights into the company is to create a leadership development program whereby we actually take mid to senior level leaders and we give them a structured learning program around base pyramid business innovation. And that's kind of a little bit in the classroom, but it's mainly out in the field. And so we take these teams and we have very concrete projects for them to work on, working with our local business in Philippines and Vietnam and India and Mexico, South Africa, wherever. And they come together as a team and they spend 4 weeks in country doing this deep immersion field work and getting a very rich, wide array of direct insights from customers, from distributors, suppliers, from other kind of partners. And then they're responsible for actually proposing to the local management team, this is the go-to-market strategy that we recommend. And that learning by doing, as opposed to sending them, kind of like Porter and Kramer's shared value article or CK's book or anything like this. It's that action-based learning, experiential learning is so important, both for them to really get what we're talking about, but also to get beyond the I know about, but actually I know how to do this is critically important, and it's transformative. Every single time we do this, they deliver. When people think, how can these people from outside my market, they've never been to Vietnam, let alone know my market. How can they possibly add value? But every time they deliver, because we get the right people with the right skills for the challenge involved. And so that piece is critically important in terms of not just reaching scale in terms of the models, but actually scaling the thing within the organization and creating a critical mass of people at a sufficient level of seniority and decision-making capability to actually have the insights and be able to drive the agenda themselves rather than it being from the center, us pushing and pushing and pushing.
Thank you. And Ted, do you have any comments?
Sure. So, I mean, you're hitting on a topic that's outside of today, but sort of that building that internal support is so important and crucial in doing this. And I think that often is forgotten sometimes, that the difficulties in making that happen in a company. But you know, I still think when we think about this space, I'm going to say this and people will go, but I think we still have too much hubris. I think there's a sense that we know more than we really do. You know, when you think about serving a customer in the top of the pyramid, you invest a lot in understanding their needs before you launch any kind of a model. Somehow, still in the base of the pyramid, we don't have enough, you know, we can't afford to hear the voices of our customer. If you proposed a model, a top of the pyramid model that said, we're ready, we're going to launch some pilots, but we can't really afford to hear the voices of our customers, I don't think you'd go anywhere. And I think it's not that expensive. It's not that complicated to do this work. It's a different market, and there isn't someone handing it to you, but I think there's this default, like it's too complicated, too expensive, therefore we can't do rigorous research to understand what's going on. And I love the idea of piloting. I think that's crucial, but what often happens is piloting doesn't work, right? That's the design of piloting. It's not meant to work, and patience runs thin, right? And you can only pilot so many times before people go, I don't see the kind of results that I need to see. I don't see the path to scalability right now. I see some pilots, and pilots are, we say we're going to, we'll learn and evolve, but no one really wants to admit when the pilots don't work, right? And there's a rush to kind of keep building things up off of maybe a flawed pilot. And I think it really comes back to the idea is we don't yet spend enough time listening to the base of the pyramid. And it's not that expensive. It's not that complicated. There's no reason we shouldn't be doing it. I think it falls back to that hubris still a little bit. I'm happy to talk about more details on how to do that, but I think I want to bring that out right up front. I think that it's not that hard. I mean, it's not simple, but it's not as complicated or as difficult as a lot of people make it out to be.
Okay. But you had mentioned that two of the sort of, barriers are the perception that it's complicated, expensive, difficult. Can you just maybe give us one example of, I know you've worked with a lot of different companies on this topic, so could you give us one example of a company that you worked with to sort of understand the BOP market and how that actually challenged an assumption they had, resulted in a different approach that they ended up taking?
Yeah, so I'll be careful because we do work with a lot of companies, but we do respect the confidentiality we have with them. So I'll be a little bit generic. The way we think about, when we think about poverty and creating value for the base of the pyramid, we think about poverty as multidimensional, right? There's a, the fallback is to say poverty is about income, but it's not. Poverty is about a lack of well-being, and a lack of well-being is multidimensional. And what you want to do is create value for people to alleviate their poverty. And we'll talk about this in another session, but when you think about distribution channels and running them, one of the biggest issues in these rural distribution channels, whatever, is often turnover. We hire people, we train them, they sell our products, and after a while they leave. And one of the companies we worked with, and we're doing even more right now with another organization in Mexico City very deeply, is trying to understand what's driving turnover. And so it's really understanding, okay, what were the poverty-related factors that are influencing people's decisions, both to get started, what predicts their turnover, and what predicts their sales, who's more productive. And one of the, one story was for an organization that worked in rural India. It wasn't a direct correlation, but it seemed to be, the women distributors they used, it seemed to be that the better they did, the more likely they were to drop out. And if you have these people dropping out, that's a killer for any model. And as it turned out, the better the women did, the more complicated their social relationships became, including at home. And the husbands became more uncomfortable with them being out and about, with them actually being a breadwinner, and it was challenging some cultural norms. And that's part of poverty, right, is the way women are perceived. And it was running right against that. And what it involved then was understanding this was going on, and then figuring out how do we engage the husbands in the process a much, much earlier way, so that they can feel that they own this as well, and it doesn't feel like something that's a threat. But without doing that and kind of collecting the data and really understanding, they were just saying, we have such a high turnover of distributors. It's so costly. And the same with customers. We do a lot of understanding customers. One of the things we just finished up is we spend an awful lot of time trying to figure out why people should be customers of us, but we don't really understand why some people choose not to be customers. When you look at someone, they look exactly the same. What makes somebody choose to be a customer and somebody not? And again, you just have to collect data, but how valuable is that? Mm-hmm. What are the factors that would either make this is the profile of a customer, these are the ones we should target, or here's a set of people that have this profile that don't seem interested. Why aren't they interested? What can we do about it? And somebody was saying, well, this doesn't sound like new business. Well, it's not. That's what you do in any business, but we fail to do it in the base of the pyramid because the market looks different or complicated or unfamiliar. So, without going into too many details, there's lots of information you can garner from this. It's extraordinarily valuable for building more robust models.
Okay, great. And Dorje, could you tell us a little bit about your experience with Novartis and setting up the social business in India, specifically around this topic? You had mentioned earlier that obviously gathering sort of insights around the BOP market is important, and you've utilized a couple of different approaches, both really hands-on, some trial and error down the line. Can you just share with us, sort of elaborate a little, share with us a little bit of a flavor of if there were any assumptions that you also tested and found out were wrong and had to be adjusted? How did some of that initial insights inform the approach that Novartis took?
Sure, happy to do so. So, for us, one of the big assets that we have is the fact through this model, we actually have people in the last mile, which is not what we have normally as part of our business model, usual business model. And that is an asset which it's really important for us to utilize to our best advantage. And the fact that these people are in the villages and they have direct personal relationships with these thousands of pharmacists and doctors. Each one of these people has got a much smaller number of these relationships, but through that relationship, through that understanding about what are the needs, the challenges, the patient population, the community that they're serving of these people. This is something that we've tried, and we're still figuring out how to get better at doing it. We're trying to utilize that as a structured, systematic way of collecting insights so that we can, on an ongoing basis, we can refine our model. So that is one piece, and that kind of applies whether you're doing it at small scale or large scale. Another thing that I think is kind of not what we actually anticipated from the outset, but we realized as we got into it, after we started scaling up, and we'd been running the business, I think, for about a year and a half, so getting into the latter part of 2008, and we'd gone through a couple of rounds of scale up at that point, so we're in kind of more than 10,000 villages at that point. We realized that as good as our model was in dealing with some of the demand side issues in terms of lack of health-seeking behavior and patient awareness around disease and all this kind of stuff, then supply side stuff in terms of educating doctors and kind of supply chain continuity, all that is all very good. But one of the things it didn't deal with was a structural challenge, was there's just not enough basic infrastructure in the village doctors and clinics. So they don't have the diagnostic equipment to diagnose disease, so they refer patients to the city. These are daily wage earners, and that's a big deal for them because then they kind of have to pay for public transport, they lose earnings, and they don't access care, kind of like 8 times out of 10. So we realized that this whole infrastructure thing was a big barrier for the patients, it was a big problem for the healthcare providers, it was actually a problem for us as well. So we started working with microfinance institutions, figure out how can we partner to make the credit available to the doctors and pharmacists so they can get the stuff that they need to provide the services close to the communities. And this is where we realized that actually our network was actually a way of doing primary market research. So we got hundreds of people out in the field. And actually through that, we were able to do primary market research with like 5,000 doctors and pharmacists in a very short space of time. That would have cost quite a lot of money to have paid an agency to do, but we designed it, we did it very kind of like light touch, easy, and we got a lot of rich data, and we realized actually there's probably half of the doctors and pharmacists who want credit from external sources, kind of outside of their family. And of those, probably only a quarter of them really have a strong desire to do something, to borrow from a microfinance institution or a bank in the near-term future. But that's still really important insight. A quarter, that's a lot. And if we know which ones they are, we can follow up on that. So that was a really interesting, kind of realization from our side that we had, through our model, actually a way of generating this kind of data as part of the model itself in areas that we hadn't even been thinking of when we started out.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to turn it to the audience to see if there are any questions before we proceed to the next part of the panel.
When you set out to do this program, did you plan to make it commercially viable? And would you have predicted that? Because Novartis, big pockets, great people, you can experiment and pilot and stay with it. If you were a startup, would you have predicted that business model? And if so, what were you thinking about the break-even? And still the balance between the social aspect and the financial aspect, what is that ratio and that balance?
Sure. So it's a great question. The simple answer is yes. We went in with the explicit intention of creating a viable business model, albeit we defined what viable means differently, because this is a very, very different segment. And even within the base of the base, of course, is not one segment. It's multiple income bands and so on. And kind of we're not in the top of the base. We're not at the bottom, but we're not at the top. So we said, given that this is rural and it's really quite low income, this is a longer term play for us. But we are absolutely going in to run it as a business, but with explicitly strengthened social objectives and goals baked into the model. So that's one piece. In terms of the balance, there was a piece about wanting to figure out how do we play in different segments, and kind of we can utilize those insights in our broader business. There's also a frustration with the old school approach to philanthropic donations, which we continue to do and we have to do as long as there are people living in absolute poverty. But that's just not an effective tool to deal with the whole range of unmet needs for such a huge number of people. So we went into it and said, this is going to be a learning tool, but then we can build off the insights in different higher up income bands. We can go sideways with the thing. We can play with it in a different way, but it's absolutely for business, for business objectives, and importantly, we anchored the thing in the business. This has not run out of corporate responsibility. I'm kind of in the corporate responsibility team, and I work with the business, but it's actually anchored there. And when they sit around the leadership team meetings, they're discussing. They've got the head of primary care, they've got the head of distribution, they've got head of medical. They're all problem solving around the issues that our base pyramid businesses are facing together, and that's basically kind of distributing out the understanding about the kind of both the challenges and the opportunities within the business. And that piece is critically important as these people kind of rotate and move on to other countries and other regions within Novartis and bring that knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? I think.
My name is Arata Onoguchi. I'm from IOC. I remember Dorje's earlier presentation where you listed 7 challenges, and you mentioned some potential use of information technologies, mobile health, stuff like that. And I just wonder, when you try to capture BOP people's perspectives, are you utilizing some sort of technologies?
So here we're in an even earlier stage of utilizing it. The first kind of use case for us was not so much to engage the community, it was more about field-based reporting systems through their mobile phones. So that gave us better quality management information that we could then basically strip out time. They're doing paper-based reporting and basically make us more lean and efficient in terms of giving us the management information we needed to optimize the model and change on a dime if we needed to, if things weren't working at a local level. So that's the first use case. Now we're starting partnerships where we're utilizing this stuff, just starting to utilize this stuff in terms of getting the information out to the patients. As I mentioned before, that's one important area because our people are rotating from village to village, and they might get back to that same village maybe every 1 month or every 2 months, but we want that information to keep coming in between. So we're just starting to experiment with that. But then also there's other use cases that we see as well in terms of the intersection between mobile health and mobile financial services, and particularly things like health microinsurance, health micro-savings accounts, mobile money in countries like Kenya, where M-Pesa is widespread. So those financial services are absolutely critical. The patients that desperately need that kind of financial protection more than anyone else in the world are precisely the ones that don't have it, and we take it for granted. So we're looking to create those kind of partnerships as well. But I have to be really open and honest to say this is super early stuff, and I can't give you any conclusions of it yet. But watch this space, and hopefully next year we might be able to tell you more.
Hi, Saba Sabani, UNDP Business Call to Action. This is reflecting on what Ted was saying. This is a question to the IFC colleagues and also Ted. Do you see, though, in terms of this knowledge and awareness of the BOP and integration in terms of business model development, a distinction between those external actors, multinationals where we're trying to enter a market versus local national companies of subsidiaries who are already there, who are trying to, let's say, expand their product reach below a certain level in terms of their knowledge and level of market information knowledge? So I know Moshe, Alex, Ted, whoever else.
Yeah, I'll try and answer. It's always tricky about who knows what about what, right? But I think that if you compare sort of a multinational company to a domestic company, they both have their own challenges, right? The multinational may not even, doesn't really understand the context very well, but they realize that. I think a lot of domestic companies, don't really understand the base of the pyramid themselves, but they may not realize that. So they may have a little bit more of a sense, I'm from this country, therefore I know. But we just heard the housing model from Domingo, right? Where they're figuring out what type of housing solutions are needed in their own country. And I believe it was in Mexico. So I think that, there is no rules for riches which every company can pursue, but I think you have to understand your strengths and weaknesses, but be careful you're not overwhelming or overcome with biases. And I think, locally that's a big challenge sometimes is that, yeah, I'm from that country, therefore I should know the base of the pyramid. You go to the major cities in India and the top executives, they don't understand rural India, right? And in Mexico and Mexico City, you don't understand the urban slums. I live in Ann Arbor. I don't know that, I don't know what's going on in Detroit and what's driving people's decisions. So I have to, I don't think of it's an answer, but I think it really depends on understanding your strengths, limitations, and avoiding any biases you might have.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ted, and thank you both so much.
How you doing? Justin Backley with the Shared Value Initiative. Quick question, and first of all, thank you to the IFC. I applaud the efforts to bring together folks who are working on parallel idea sets. Ted obviously represented a base pyramid, the work at Michigan, and the work that we've done around shared value. So thank you to IFC for trying to create those bridges between these idea sets. One thing that I've noticed, and I wonder for both Ted and for Dorje, is as companies get involved in base of the pyramid strategies, there's almost a reticence amongst the leaders to be seen as profiting of creating a business model that touches the base of the pyramid. That what I appreciate today is this frank conversation about, as you said, Dorje, right in your opening, yes, we approach this with a business model, but then publicly almost this reticence to be seen to be profiting from that. And I wonder if you both feel like that's changing and evolving. Ted, back to your opening comments about with the base of the pyramid and not for or at. And if that indicates to you and to you, Dorje, a changing in the mindsets of that this isn't partnership, and it's okay, even if the company is profiting in its pursuit of these opportunities. Thanks.
I'll take a first cut, although maybe you have a very specific example. I think the sense is there is greater recognition across all sectors that business is going to play a role in alleviating poverty. And for business to play a role, and particularly to scale, it has to make economic sense. So I think, over the past, 10 years ago when we were doing this, there were people that are like, and there still are, frankly, business isn't part of the solution, they're part of the problem. And, but that group is quieted down because, frankly, a lot of the development agencies are embracing this as a development tool. But one thing it does is it makes this need for understanding impact to be even more critical. Because all these development agencies that are supporting business, if you can't begin to really demonstrate that you're doing something that's creating social value, they're not going to continue to support. And there are going to be examples where businesses are not doing well socially. And you need to have evidence to show that, in general, businesses do. From the perspective of the CEOs, I think what got the original set a decade or so really interested was legacy. Was to say, this is what, part of my tenure in the company is going to be about this. And it has to make money for it to scale, but they don't want to talk about how much. Part of that is just, you don't want people on your back because of that. We got to make money doing this. So we're more comfortable saying it, but we're not going to talk about how much money we're going to make, because that's not an attractive proposition. So what we want to do is highlight the social value we're creating. And yeah, we're making money. But when you ever see people present the slides, they talk about the increase in, we did this for that and that for that, but you don't see the traditional financial numbers. Here's our revenues, here's our profitability from this business initiative, which you would see in most other things. And I think part of that is they're still emerging. So they may not be as large. And when you put it in comparison to Novartis, it's probably still a pretty small thing. So there's that. And then there's the other thing, that's not the part I really want to highlight. I don't want to tell people I'm making X margins on the poor, but I'm going to do it because I have to make this work. So I think your question is really well put, and that gives pause for a question is, as the domain evolves, we may need to have a more robust conversation and become more comfortable with the idea that, we can make money off of the poor in a way that, whatever term we use, we call it mutual value, you guys call it shared value, but in a way that works for everyone, and you're creating a bigger pie. And I think that's the way, everyone benefits. And that's the way business generally works, right?
It's a great question. We're kind of in limbo. So we're explicit about the fact that we do this on a for-profit basis. And to begin with, we did used to get some questions about, these are some of the poorest people in the world. Why kind of you've got deep pockets? Why aren't you doing it on a kind of zero profit, not-for-profit basis? And it always comes down to the kind of the basic objective. We want to do something that actually can reach scale. And we're active in communities of like these 20,000+ villages with 70 million people in India, but that's a tiny fraction of the rural population in India still. So we've come a long way, but we've got a mountain to climb still. We're still in the hills. So it comes down to that core goal. And when we communicate with our stakeholders, as long as we're explicit about that, then it actually usually plays out fine. Very few stakeholders really have a problem with that. In the public health space, you do have more people who just have maybe a high level of antipathy towards the profit motive per se. But that's fine. I respect and understand that, but they do their thing, we do our thing, we try and find ways to communicate. But we still haven't got to the point where we're putting out our P&L around our social business yet. So we talk, you saw I gave the numbers about these are the health education meetings, the camps, the participants, blah, 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 blah. But we're not talking about sales yet. And there is a reticence, but I think it will come with time.
Alexis, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to say one little thing because I really like the question. Justin was fantastic. And I think, Ted, you gave the answer that are really from the multinational, larger, international companies. So I just wanted to at least speak up for the companies that are here, for whom, when we first talk to them, they go, I'm doing inclusive business, but they are. Because they actually do measure, they do it, and Vinta actually told you how much growth they've had, 22%. So they are making money. If they weren't making money, we wouldn't have invested. So I think we do have to change the conversation from a legacy CEO of multinationals to founders of companies here, second, third generation companies here, who it is part of their business because it's a business necessity. It is not a whim. It is not a legacy. If they don't do what they do, they're going to be out of business. So I think that's why, you know, Ted and I always talk to each other. Justin, you know, is inviting us to join the Shared Value Initiative. I think that's why the council is necessary, because as one company, you can say something and people will say, okay, maybe you're exceptional. But when you have 400 companies that are doing something that is deemed to have real impact, we have to speak up, because otherwise the conversation will be about the 10, 15 very good multinationals that should be doing many different things because they're larger companies and they can do more, but that the local companies have local knowledge. Yes, the CEO in Mumbai of a large company may not know what's happening in the rural villages, but if you ask, Fino, what are they doing in the slums when they go and do payments, they know their market. So I think we have to really bring that information. I think that knowledge needs to be disseminated more. Thank you.
Thank you, Eriko.